Back from our brief recess. Jason, would you bring us up to speed?
Yes. So the first item on the agenda is an update to our SEPA code. We are in the process of doing a complete rewrite of the SEPA code. We briefly introduced this item about a month and a half ago. I think it might have been at the April meeting, where we discussed kind of generally what we were doing and kind of the process. We've now completed a technical memorandum identifying how we're going to update our SEPA exemption thresholds and do a planned action for downtown, and then also a draft ordinance. LDC has been selected as a firm to kind of help us with this effort, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt Covet with LDC to do a PowerPoint, kind of walk us through where we're at in the update process. So, and all this information is also included in your packet. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt with LDC.
Thank you, Jason. I'm gonna go ahead and get my slide deck up here. Just a moment. Can you all see this? Okay, so I'm basically going to go, as Jason said, go through very high level what we were accomplishing in the work that we've been doing with the SEPA code update, particularly the adopting the exemptions under the minor new construction and the planned action, sort of the why and the how. High level objectives for this meeting include just giving you an overview of the proposed SEPA code, the code structure, talk about the new exemptions that are being proposed and why, and give you a bit of a clear understanding of how why we did this technical memorandum and what it shows in terms of environmental protection. So just a quick background on SEPA code and what we're seeking to do here. So as you may know, the State Environmental Policy Act was enacted in 1971, codified in state law and in Department of Ecology Administrative Code. Basically what it does is it provides a framework and requirements for evaluating environmental impacts. It's a procedural statute. There's no built-in outcome that's sought. It's a procedural statute that's designed to ensure that potential environmental impacts of a proposed action or project, whether that's a housing development or the actions of a city or county, like a comprehensive plan or a sub-area plan, the environmental impacts are revealed, evaluated, and prevented or mitigated. Since SEPA was enacted into law in 1971, there's been a bunch of new layers of environmental protection that have come in directly from state statute, as well as from development regulations that the city is required to implement under new laws. For example, Growth Management Act, or GMA, in 1990, 1974's Shoreline Management Act, the Local Project Review Act, and then the Bonney Lake Municipal Code and the mitigation and regulations that are included in the code that have been developed according to best available science in accordance with these other laws have really built a really strong regime of environmental protection using local development regulations that SEPA isn't always the best mechanism for revealing and mitigating or preventing environmental impact. So what's become of it as a result? Well, there's been several, the ability to exempt projects from SEPA review in many different forms that have been introduced over the years. This is a series of potential options. This is adapted from some work City of Olympia did, but there's basically these three different buckets. Minor new construction, which basically means that the act of building or constructing certain small types of development are exempt from SEPA review because the anticipated impacts are just don't justify it. Urban infill exemptions, which was adopted into statute several years ago, and a planned action. And we're looking at the first and the third of these two options here as new exemptions from SEPA code to be potentially enacted into Bonney Lake's municipal code. So what that means is that there's certain circumstances under which projects under a certain threshold are not subject to SEPA review unless they're on lands covered by water, or projects within a certain area that's been studied more broadly are exempt from SEPA review. And so now I'm going to go through really quickly what Bonney Lake's SEPA exemptions currently are and how they're being changed. The genesis of this was really brought forward by the Housing Action Plan that we were lucky enough to work with you all on a year or two ago. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was improving SEPA implementation as a way of, in some cases, improving the process by which housing is built, reducing redundancies in permitting that can help housing get to market quicker. And a couple of the recommendations, the options that were outlined in the plan included minor new construction, infill, and some work on categorical exemptions in landslide hazard areas. The first two of those, the infill, we went the planned action route instead of the infill exemption route, which we can talk more about later. But just wanted to situate these actions more broadly in the discussion about okay, how do we improve the process for getting housing to market? Minor new construction. So these are exemptions, flexible thresholds for minor new construction that are available within the administrative code that governs implementation of SEPA. And what these flexible levels basically say is that up to a certain level, the base minimum exemptions here that you see in the left-hand column are the minimum. So if you just adopt the statute by reference, this is what you get. The code's been revised over the years. Most recently, just a few years ago, to raise those maximum thresholds under which construction of a particular type of project would be exempt from SEPA. And Bonney Lake's minor new construction thresholds are now out of date. There's higher levels of potential minor new construction exemptions. The current exemptions in code were the maximum prior to the 2013 amendments to the code. So this is just looking at a recognition that thresholds have changed under the state law, or under the state code, and we're taking advantage of that without diminishing environmental protections, which I'll get to in a moment. What's being proposed is the maximum level of minor new construction exemptions. So this is just construction, mind you, not the land use action necessarily that allows these units to be built, but construction of up to 30 single-family homes, construction of up to 60 multifamily units, barn, loafing shed, equipment storage, produce storage, or packing structure going from 10,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet, office, school, commercial, recreational, service, storage building, parking facilities going from 4,000 square feet and 20 parking spaces all the way up to 30,000 square feet and 90 parking spaces, and going from 500 to 1,000 cubic yards of fill or excavation. And again, this is going up to the maximum level of exemption allowed under the state's administrative code. The other avenue of potential change that we're looking at here is, as Jason described, the planned action. So this is a relatively recent addition to the SEPA statute. It was created in 2012 and updated in 2017. It allows a city to pass an ordinance, a so-called planned action ordinance. And that ordinance establishes that the city has undertaken broad environmental review for a particular area of town by conducting an environmental impact statement. And what that does is SEPA is really designed to study cumulative impacts, which is why some of those minor new constructions, you don't always get a lot of good information out of it because there's just not that much impact from building a couple houses. But when you look at an entire sub area or a particular area of town, particularly where there's a lot of development potential, you can study environmental impact better by looking at that environmental impact statement level that the city has to do a plan for a sub-area, for example. And the city of Bonney Lake completed an EIS for its comprehensive plan in 1994, and then a supplemental in 1996 that included planning for growth in the downtown area. And so what a proposed planned action would do would be to establish that the correct environmental review has been done through the EIS, and that state statute is met that would allow proposals for new development within that area that are consistent with that plan to be exempt from SEPA review. So basically, if it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the downtown sub-area plan that was done in originally in 94 and 96, as long as it doesn't the thresholds that were studied within that plan aren't exceeded, that a proposal would be exempt from SEPA review. So what did we do in order to establish that these are good ideas? Well, to be able to use SEPA exemptions, you really have to show your work. We produced the technical memorandum that's in your packet as a way of complying with state statute and administrative code, because it's very, very important that we show that environmental protection is not diminished by adopting these exemptions. It'd be kind of contrary to the purpose of the state law if you adopted huge levels of exemption and it resulted in a lot of environmental harm. But what we have to set out to do, and what we've done in the technical memorandum, is show that there is ample regulation of environmental performance and environmental areas within Bonney Lake's municipal code, including buffers on wetlands and streams as established in the Shoreline Master Program and the Critical Areas Regulations, mitigation that's established for things like traffic, and so there's a lot that's been built into the code over the years that didn't exist when SEPA passed, and this is just showing, going through the statutory and the code requirements and showing how in each case the code exists to protect the environment, and that exempting those projects from SEPA review does not remove environmental protections, that those protections are still there, just at the local code level rather than being reviewed through a SEPA checklist. So do you have any questions for us on the minor new construction or the planned action potential changes to exemptions? And I'll go ahead and take the presentation down.
Matt, am I correct in assuming or understanding that basically these exemptions as proposed what's currently outside the city and county and the other city? Same level?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm sorry. Am I correct in my understanding that the proposed exemptions just bring us up to what is currently in force in the cities around us and the county?
I can't speak to all the cities, but many cities around you have adopted the maximum thresholds. I don't feel comfortable. I haven't looked at all of them to say all, but I know that many have. And so it's especially within the larger urban conglomeration, adopting the maximum thresholds is far more common than anything else.
Is it the driving force is because the population or construction changes, or?
Just because the volume of development is such that small levels of new construction don't. Doing the SEPA does not gain you any new information, and so jurisdictions have sought to remove that requirement because it's really duplicative. That when you've got really strong development regulations and a lot of really strong trends in new development, there's just it would be duplicative and unnecessary paperwork, to be honest, which is why jurisdictions have adopted the maximum, because their code protects the environment, and it would be quite burdensome to local governments if they required 5 or more housing units construction, even if the land use has been approved to go through SEPA. So it's a recognition of the broader trends, and also a recognition that jurisdictions in the larger urban area have been dealing with development pressure for a very long time and have established really strong local development regulations that that maintain that environmental protection, and that the SEPA process is duplicative at that point.
One more, Matt, is as I understand it, then the developers are going to build to the maximums rather than smaller, generally, to maximize their profits on this?
I mean, developers are going to the market pressure is going to drive what developers are going to build, and the developability of a site more so than the SEPA. What the SEPA does, in terms of its effect on if it's really duplicative, and we've shown that local regulations are plenty sufficient to protect the environment. What it really does is it adds a little bit of time and complexity that increases the cost incrementally for any particular development. So, if a developer could get on a particular commercial site could get 30,000 square feet, and it was profitable, they're going to do it whether SEPA is required or not. It's the little incremental, the few extra weeks of review, the potential of the potential uncertainty of appeal, these things that kind of bake in small increases in development costs that accumulate over time. And so what jurisdictions have done is really to say, we've already got the development regulations to handle this, and so we see fit that adopting the maximums makes a lot of sense for nearly every jurisdiction in your area.
So, kind of to tag on to that, Commissioner Sarver, I mean, a lot of times we see these as duplicative reviews, as Matt said, as for lack of a better word, additional layers of bureaucracy. When SEPA was written in 1976, Matt pointed out, we didn't have the Growth Management Act, we didn't have critical areas, we didn't have design review, we didn't have traffic impact studies. So all those things that we're now doing, we now do by code. We used to have to do back in the 70s through SEPA mitigations individually, project by project. Instead, we have now codified those things. So you have to do a traffic study. You have to protect critical areas. You have to go through design review. You have to be consistent in the zoning. And so what happens on these smaller projects is they apply for SEPA, and our decision is there is no significant environmental impact because it's been mitigated by code, and so we issue a D. 99%, I should say 90% of the decisions, 95% of the decisions we DNS, which is there's no significant environmental impact. We've issued a few MDNSs, but that's very few. I think I've issued 3 or 4 in the 10 years I've been here, maybe 5. And in the last 20 years, I think we've issued 1 EIS. So it's when it was created in 1976, it was the linchpin of environmental review and protection. It has now become duplicative in a lot of the growth management planning communities. And so we're making people go through 2 tracks to achieve the same objective. Because, as Matt said, when we did it in 76, we didn't have the shoreline management act, we didn't have the growth management act, we didn't have critical areas, we didn't have design review. And so basically all the things that we would use to mitigate impacts to projects with SEPA, now we just use code. And so you're not really, I guess the best word is, it's not a value-added permit below those levels, right? You're not adding anything related to environmental protection below those levels. You're just more and more creating just more paperwork. They fill out the SEPA checklist, they code mitigates, I agree, and we issue the DNS. I mean, that's the pretty smaller projects, kind of the what happens. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry for jumping in, Matt.
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Jason. That's helpful to get that history of like 1 EIS.
I have a question. So I just wondered, are these exemptions, are they like cumulative? I guess was what I'm thinking. Like say, so 60 units, is exempt. If there was like 360 units going on at the same time in the city, would all 3 of them be exempt?
Yeah, the construction of them would be exempt. What that 2 things. So the construction would be exempt if there's a land use process that establishes that if it's like a conditional use permit or something, or if there's design review or a subdivision, a full subdivision, that is not exempt from SEPA. So if you've got a 30 unit or greater plat, the plat itself still has to go through SEPA. The construction of those units, so the civil permits and the building permits and such, is not, you would not have to do SEPA for those. So there is still a level of SEPA review, because the recognition is that larger projects, there is always a chance that there's a much greater chance that you're going to have things that arise above and beyond what code is designed to mitigate. The other piece of that is that a lot of the things that you'd be worried about with something like 3 60-unit multifamily buildings going in at once along SR 410 or something, for example, is that the way traffic mitigation occurs now with traffic studies and with proposed mitigation between the state for the state highway portion of it and the city, is that you've got ultimate capacity and levels of service, and if you're triggering one of those thresholds of like this is going to add a certain amount beyond what's considered acceptable under the transportation element of the comp plan, or levels of service established by the city, that there'd have to be improvements to the transportation system made, and that's done as part of the review that the city does. So the city says, oh, you've triggered a threshold, you have to install a new signalized intersection, or you've got to build a park and ride because you've crossed some threshold. That used to be done via SEPA. Now it's done via the city's code. So two pieces is that bigger projects, there is still that recognition that if it's a land use decision, it's likely not exempt if it's a large project, and a lot of that mitigation is taken care of through things like traffic concurrency and levels of service and meeting concurrency requirements, for example.
Just one addition. If you can't under SEPA segment a single proposal into pieces to avoid SEPA. So if you had a 180 unit apartment complex, they couldn't come in and say, oh, we're just doing this piece and then this piece and this piece to try to avoid SEPA. So if it's a cumulative project that exceeds the threshold, then SEPA would be required. If it was 60 unit projects that were a quarter mile apart, different owners, different projects, then those would each be exempt.
Thanks.
Any other question?
Thank you, gentlemen. That's given us a lot of good information.
So I just want to make sure that there was no issues with the ordinance itself. I think we're going to bring this back. This might be for a public hearing August 31st. I talked with Clay. I just got to there's some work I still have to do to finalize the ordinance, but we're targeting that August 31st as the public.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And comprehensive plan policy gap analysis.
So as Clay's getting his stuff ready, we are in the very, very early stages of completing the periodic update to our comprehensive plan. I think Commissioner Sarver just got appointed to Planning Commission when we did our last periodic update. I know Commissioner Dahl and Commissioner Solom and Commissioner Strasbourg were here. But we have to do a big periodic update of our comprehensive plan. It used to be every 8 years, and after every 10, so this will be our last one for 10 years. But one of the things we have to do as part of that update is kind of go through and look at all of our policies, make sure they're consistent with law. Not to steal too much thunder from Clay, so I'll let him kind of walk through the whole framework and what we're doing. But LDC has been selected to do this gap analysis, and this will be kind of one of the primary drivers for our work plan that we have to prepare for the periodic update. And if you want to talk about the big table that we linked, that's like 183 pages, I will gladly sit down and talk to you about it. We just didn't think we should go through every single policy, but for record keeping and certification issues later, I had Clay go through everything, showing both where we're consistent and not consistent. The focus tonight is just areas where we have gaps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Clay White, who's the planning manager. I don't know technically your name over at LDC, but also former planning director for both, has worked in both private and public. So with that, and the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you, Jason, and it's a pleasure to be with the Planning Commission again. I think we met with y'all when we were doing the Housing Action Plan, so it's good to be here. So as Jason kind of mentioned, a big piece of a comprehensive plan update is kind of showing your work, what are the differences between changes in state laws or regional policies in your current comprehensive plan so that you can make updates and kind of meet what you're required to do, but do it in a way that meets your values and meets what you want to do for your community. So since we did the gap analysis, I was talking to Jason, I thought, maybe this would be a good opportunity to just kind of walk through some of the requirements under the Growth Management Act so you can understand some of the connections between state laws, regional policies, comprehensive planning, and then you'll kind of see where this gap analysis fits. And then this will come back to you next year as the comprehensive plan process ramps up. So kind of our goals tonight, we just want to provide you an overview of kind of state and regional and local requirements, which will inform your comprehensive plan update. And I think the biggest thing to remember is that everything is connected. So, when you're looking at the Growth Management Act or Puget Sound Regional Council or countywide planning policies or your local comprehensive plan, there's a consistency that happens between all of these different documents, and they inform your development regulations. And so, I think it's kind of nice to be able to say, okay, what are the things that we're doing at the local level, and how's that connected to things that are required at the state or regional level? I'd like to just brief you on some key issues and topics that would be important during the update, and then we'll go through the gap analysis. So I think once we go through these steps, you'll kind of see how the gap analysis fits into this big planning process that you're going to be undertaking. So let's start with the Growth Management Act, which is one of our foundational state laws that kind of guides how growth occurs in the state of Washington. It was enacted in 1990. It provides kind of that framework for state, regional, county, and local planning coordination. It requires faster growing communities to develop a comprehensive plan and to manage growth. So what that means is that there's different requirements for Bonney Lake than, say, what might be required in Okanagan County or in Columbia County or in smaller cities. So not everybody across the state is doing the same type of planning. It requires you to update a comprehensive plan every 10 years. That changed in a bill this last year. It used to be 8. And so your update deadline is December of 2024. And you're going to be looking out and planning for growth out to 2044. So looking at issues like housing and land use and capital facilities, and it's your long range plan so that you're well prepared as people move to the city. And I think what's really important as planning commissioners to understand that growth management is designed to be a bottoms up planning process. And what that means is while there are state laws that kind of guide some of the requirements you must meet, or there's regional policies that say, how do we coordinate as a region or between a county and cities, you still have decision-making ability to make sure that growth occurs in a way that fits your community character. And so it's this balancing act of, how do you meet state law requirements, but at the same time, do it in a way that isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Bonney Lake is different than the cities that are around you or different cities that are in the region, and the state law recognizes that. And so, that gets integrated into your planning process. The Growth Management Act has 14 goals, and it covers everything from transportation to economic development, protection of critical areas, and property rights. And so, goals don't mean a lot unless you implement them. And so these are broad statements that are within the Growth Management Act, and then they're implemented in a variety of ways. Different statutes, a lot of them are implemented within the Growth Management Act itself. So, go ahead. Oh, okay. So Bonney Lake has its has its comprehensive plan organized differently than how the statute is set up, and that's perfectly good because that's that bottoms up planning process. But generally, when you're implementing goals, it does it through a variety of planning elements that are in your comprehensive plan. So land use, where you're planning for more people and jobs, housing, where you're planning for a variety of different housing types, capital facilities, making sure that you have sewer and water and power and schools and all of those important things to be there and available when development occurs. Utilities, and of course, transportation is a big piece. There's also a lot of optional elements, which, lots of cities that utilize to help make sure that as growth occurs, you're planning for things like parks and economic development. And again, your update is due at the end of 2024. And I just wanted to highlight this because, when you get to your comp plan update, there's so much work that happens at the state regional level that precedes your update. There is Vision 2050, which is your regional planning process. There's policies that get adopted there. There are state law changes. There are what are called countywide planning policies, which are policies shared between the county and cities in Pierce County. And all of those kind of set the table for the work that you're going to be starting next year. And so, that's why Jason spends time being a good advocate on behalf of the city at the state level or at the regional level, because what happens there does have an impact on the planning that you do at the city. It's really important. If you just start when your comp plan process starts, then your choices are more limited than if you're involved at a broader level. So let's talk just a little bit about Puget Sound Regional Council and Vision 2050. So Puget Sound Regional Council, or PSRC, is a regional transportation and planning organization, and it focuses on Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap counties. So if you're outside of those 4 counties, then you don't have some of the planning requirements that our more populated counties do. As a transportation organization, it does a lot of work with transportation funding. So over $240 million in transportation funding each year to communities in the 4-county region. And then they do a lot of planning work as well. So they're looking at regional transportation plans, economic development, and then planning as well. And that primary focus is really on how transportation and planning link up. So, we should be strategizing about where we're planning transportation, light rail, bus service, and there's a direct relationship on where people live. And then the other thing is, because these are 4 of our biggest counties, there is some positive aspects to coordinating beyond a county line. So, people that are driving across the county line, they don't know when they're crossing that boundary, or, for transportation impacts or parks or shared goals on, protecting the environment. So, that's what PSRC brings those jurisdictions together. The planning piece is called Vision 2050, and it contains multi-county planning policies. And it also contains a regional growth strategy that guides how the 4-county region grows. The multi-county planning policies and regional growth strategies are implemented through countywide planning policies, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then your comprehensive plan, and then, of course, into your development regulations. So Vision 2050 is focused on growth that's going to occur. They're looking at a 2050 planning horizon, while your next comprehensive plan is only looking out to 2044. So that gets adjusted a bit when you do your local planning work. But what's pretty amazing is that in a 4-county region, we're looking to grow between 2017 and 2050 by 1.6 million people in the 4-county region, and adding 1.2 million jobs. And so, as we grow, Vision has a lot of different policies focused on everything from housing to transportation to the environment. And that plan was recently updated over the last couple of years, which is something that the city will be looking at. And some of the new focus areas for new policies concern things like climate change, equity, displacement, housing. But almost every element, kind of like your comprehensive plan, has policies that are new or revised that the city will have to consider as your local plan is updated. So it is different in the 4-county region. So think about it this way for population. If if you were in Thurston County, you would get from the Office of Financial Management, they would give you a population range, a low, medium, and high, and usually a county and cities would choose the medium population range to plan for 20 years. A county would sit down with all of its cities and you'd say, all right, so we're gonna plan for this many people and you're gonna plan for this many people, and you would divvy that out between a county and the cities. There's an extra layer being in the 4-county region. So through Vision 2050, they break down population growth into what's called regional geographies. Metropolitan cities, which would be like Tacoma, core cities, which would like be Puyallup and University Place, and so on and so forth. Bonney Lake is within the cities and towns category. So for Pierce County, that accounts for about 7% of the growth. And in that category, you've got cities like South Prairie and Buckley, Ruston, Gig Harbor, Eatonville, Roy. So there's a number of smaller jurisdictions that are in there, probably yourselves and Gig Harbor are two of the larger communities. So it further breaks down kind of those categories. And really the goal under Vision is that you'd put more growth in areas that are closer to transportation networks. So not a ton of growth is allocated to Bonney Lake. And then, of course, that gets dispersed in those communities that you share that category with in Pierce County. For Pierce County, you've got about 7% of the jobs growth that's allocated to the cities and towns category. So, now that you have a target, we'll talk about that in a moment. What you're really hoping for is that all the communities that are in your regional geography, that together you're planning for a cumulative amount of growth that equals about 10,000 jobs there. So you're on your way there.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Exceed our whatever percent they assign us. We grow faster and have more jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of thoughts. I mean, I don't personally think there's anything in state law that prohibits you from growing faster than you have to, like, there's a difference between adopting a planning target. Like, so that's a planning exercise, right? We are planning to grow by this many people. And with that, we're going to plan for transportation networks and schools. And then there's growth that actually occurs. So at the state level, I think that they would tell you that the target that you adopt is a floor. So, if you go above that, that's fine. I think that sometimes at the regional level, given they want less growth in cities and towns, they would probably, have more concerns about growth occurring faster than how they've allocated growth. Again, but for them, I think it's more about, it's not about how much growth actually occurs, it's how much you plan for, which seems a bit odd. But so I think if growth actually happens faster, I don't think that there's anything that says that's a bad thing to have occur.
And to piggyback on that, yeah, there's not any, when it comes to certification, the certification is planning for not enough growth, so planning below your target. There's no penalty for blowing past a target. The only concern becomes in if you blow past it too much, did you underplan road, street, utilities? But when it comes to this jobs target, that is not a concern because there's not one plan that we do that is based on jobs, right? So your water system plan, sewer system plan, streets, parks, all the plans and all the things that we're doing, none of them have a correlation to how many jobs because there's not a correlation between jobs and commercial truck traffic. For example, mini storage has one job, but a building of equal size and square footage may be an office building with hundreds of jobs. And so there's not a good, like with housing where you have a correlation between every housing equals 1 point something peak PM hour trips and 10 daily trips. Those type of statistics exist for housing. For jobs individually, there's no correlation. So of all the targets we do, this is the one where I say whatever PSRC gives us, we just adopt and move on. because there's not really let's probably say a penalty, and there's not a planning document that we rely on other than to say what our jobs to housing balance is, and that's really not any other than a planning tool. So just to kind of pick it, this is the one that's always been kind of like, do we do it? But it's part of PSRC's thing.
I also think it's important that for when you're planning for jobs, you're planning for employment generally. Whereas, if you're going to have enough jobs regionally, you have to think about like, well, you need jobs in a lot of different areas. So, it's not, it's industrial, it's commercial, it's, retail. And so I think creating enough capacity so that you're nimble enough to have jobs in the various sectors is important. So I think things happen a little faster. That's not a bad thing at all. Just really briefly on your countywide planning policy. So again, your countywide planning policies are going to be implementing your regional policies from PSRC and also be consistent with your state law like the Growth Management Act. So countywide planning policies just ensure coordinated growth between a county and the cities within the county. So it talks, there you have policies regarding transportation, capital facilities, planning, housing, and growth. So this would be where, Jason is working with, other planning directors to, put together the countywide planning policies that have policies that on areas where, you should be coordinating on important planning issues. This was recently adopted, so there's new amendments which reflect changes in the regional policies and state laws. And, the CPPs are required to be consistent with, the documents you see on there, Vision 2050. And there's also part of this in the Growth Management Act is 3678-210, which outlines countywide planning policy requirements. So, CPPs are a good thing. It helps make sure that, Sumner and Bonney Lake are talking to each other about things that are happening in their communities and how you work together towards common goals. So let's just talk a little bit about, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I heard something, so I just wanted to make sure I paused. So just a little bit about your comprehensive plan update. So again, you've got that deadline, end of 2024. So just as a general overview, as part of your comp plan, you're required to meet Growth Management Act and Puget Sound Regional Council requirements, and they're different. So state law, there's a set of a guidebook that's put out by the Department of Commerce, which is kind of like your checklist of things you need to do to meet state law requirements for your update. This includes updating your plan and policies for changes in state laws, case law, or for critical areas regulations that would be utilizing new best available science and updating those regulations. So if you decided you weren't going to implement your Growth Management Act requirements, there's appeal processes people could have. And, it goes all the way to you could have sanctions through the governor's office if you just decided not to do an update. PSRC, it's not about state law requirements, it's about consistency. So PSRC is looking for you to be consistent with that regional vision. Now, consistency really isn't defined. I'd like to think it is that you're not frustrating kind of that regional process. I think that you still have a lot of choices in how you develop policies and regulations. As an example, you don't have to have a comprehensive plan policy for every regional policy. You don't have to mirror those. So, it's really like just analyzing those changes at the regional level or in the countywide planning policies and saying, making a conscious choice, how do we adapt those for Bonney Lake? What makes sense? Because, some things that would make sense in Tacoma wouldn't make sense for Bonney Lake. But it helps you kind of break things down for your city. And just kind of, for both have requirements kind of on the, strong community involvement, as you're planning for more growth, as you're adopting new policies, of just how you engage your community is important. Few key issues. There is funding provided for this update. It's not, it's not probably a full amount to get your update done. However, it's been 20 years since funding's been provided, so I think that's that's a good step forward. There are some state laws that have changed that are pretty big that you'll be looking at. House Bill 1220 substantially changed the housing element requirements under the Growth Management Act. So what this means is that under the way the law was written previously, you have to plan for a variety of housing types. And so it talks about, in your policies and in your regulations, how do you provide for single family and multifamily and homes at different income levels. The new law really has gotten much more granular with the requirements. So it's really getting down to how are you providing housing at different income bands, including extremely low income housing. It's going to be pretty tough for some communities to implement the new requirements because they're so specific. The Department of Commerce is working on preparing some guidance on how this should be implemented. I think that for Bonney Lake, it's going to be easier than some communities in terms of implementing this, but it's pretty substantial. I mean, everything's getting harder, more challenging in terms of the requirements, and this is certainly a bill that is going to cause some communities some strife. House Bill 1717 adds new requirements regarding tribal engagement in the planning process. This is also still being worked out by Commerce on actually how it will be implemented, but it requires some consultation process with tribes that would like to participate as part of the process. And so we're already kind of working with Jason a little bit about how that would be implemented. Part of our gap analysis that we did is we took a look at these bills and then compared your current policies with the new regulations. So that was part of our gap analysis to look at, what things maybe should be looked at as part of the comp plan with these new state laws that have come in. There are several other smaller bills, and there's also, several bills that did not pass this last session that would have had a major impact on your update that will probably pass this coming up session. One is House Bill 1099, which was the climate change bill. It would have required a climate change element in your comprehensive plan, a whole host of regulations and requirements to be looking at changes from or impacts from our climate. Also, a salmon recovery bill that would have been looking at what's called net ecological gain for projects. I don't think it would have affected development proposals, but it would have affected public works proposals for road projects because it would have required you basically to enhance, to not just have a no impact on the environment as part of some projects, but to actually have it would actually have to show how you're adding a net ecological gain for some public projects. So, which, is going to add a substantial amount of cost and time. So there's some bills that are coming that could impact you in the future.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a cutoff point where, we have a comprehensive plan that has to include bills up to this point so that we have time to create our comprehensive plan? So it's not like there's a bill passed 2 weeks before our comprehensive plan is due and now we have to implement that plan. Is there a cutoff?
Yeah, that's a great question. The cutoff should have been this last legislative session. So, I think that if they had passed those bills this session, that's going to be pretty hard for any of these, for jurisdictions that have a 2024 deadline. I think that would be pretty difficult to accomplish. There was a bill this last year, House Bill 1241, that provided the city of Bonney Lake an extra 6 months to complete its comprehensive plan. So that it moved from June of 2024 to December. So theoretically, they could pass something this session, which you'd have to implement. But I just think that would be extremely difficult. It's not just, it's really hard to shift gears when you're in the middle of an update. The other thing is, a lot of times for stuff like this, you need guidance written, like how are you going to implement it? How is it going to be consistent across the state? And so by the time that would happen, you'd be almost done with your update. So I know the hope of many legislators was hoping at least 1099 would pass, so it would be implemented by those with a 2024 update deadline, but that didn't happen. So I don't think you would have to take on those new bills, but there's nothing in state law that says this is the cutoff.
Well, there is one thing, Glenn, and that's there's a new change to an element or a new element added, and they don't provide, well, the way the current law sits, They could also change this as part of the law, but the cities and our lobbyists would be fighting hard against it. If they don't provide funding with at least to complete that work, with at least 2 years prior to that element being required, they can't require you to do that
Okay, so it's like a 2-year kind of cutoff-ish.
ish, under the current state law. And that's why we're having to meet the new House bill, because they are providing for housing, $125,000, I think, in our community. And they're saying that that is the money to fully implement the changes that were required by the housing. You can debate it, there might be lawsuits about that, but that's Commerce's position. But like, if you look at the comprehensive plan now, you go through the mandatory elements, it says Parks and Rec, but they're still listed as optional because the state has never made the funding available to do a Parks and Recreational element. And so there is a cutoff, but it's the legislature. They could remove that law as part of the change and say, except for.
Okay.
So Clay's right, but that does give us a little protection. I know you're on the road by you, and that's something I've been talking about.
Yeah, you're right. That would, so if there would have to be the money, and they'd have to extend your time to get your comp plan update done. So there was, the legislature allocated $10 million for the 4-county region for comp plan updates. There was actually $20 million in the budget, and $10 million came out when those bills didn't pass. So, but you're right. If they pass those bills this session, they'd have to make sure that they gave you 2 years to do your update. So they'd have to extend that time, and then give you money to actually do the work.
Thank you.
So just a few key issues at PSRC. We've kind of gone through, there's some new chapters with substantial new policies. And then, of course, your growth targets for population employment. So, you've got some established targets so that you're consistent with vision. Now, you've already haven't adopted targets. Jason passed on through Resolution 3012 that established targets that you'll be utilizing as you do your planning starting next year, and those are consistent with the county-wide proposal and with Vision 2050. So that'll be your starting place for a conversation next year. And just a little bit on your gap analysis. So now that we've done that framework, you can see, hey, there's been changes to state laws, there's been changes to regional policies, there's been change to county-wide planning policies. Now it's our turn to do our comprehensive plan. So what the gap analysis does is it compares your current comprehensive plan with changes at those levels, and then provides you some analysis of where there might be gaps in policies, so you can know where you may want to consider newer revised policies. It's not saying that you have to, but it's saying, hey, here are some areas where there may be some things that you should address or beef things up, or make some changes. It provides a really strong show your work. Part of building a good record for a project like this is to be able to show PSRC or the state that, hey, we did this analysis, and we don't feel we have to update certain policies because we have these policies already there. We're already doing these things. So this is just like an early action to really start nailing down that show your work aspect. I think the other important piece is, when coming to the Planning Commission or City Council and you're coming with some proposals for policies for you to consider, you might have a question like, well, why are you proposing this new policy? And then Jason might say, I've got a reason, because we did a gap analysis and we're doing it for these particular reasons. So it provides some really good early work to show where you may have some things that you need to address. And for the most part, you really have a strong comprehensive plan that covers most of the areas that you'll need to as part of this process. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to share one other document just for a second. That's okay. Okay, is it sharing?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Oh, now we got it.
Okay, perfect. So the gap analysis that we put together is about 160 pages on 11 by 17. So really what and we provide it to you in two formats. The first is a 160-page document, which goes through every multi-county planning policy. That's from Vision 2050. So it has the policy number, it has the policy, and where it's underlined or there's strike through, it shows you the changes in Vision 2050 from the previous version in 2040. So you can easily see what was changed within that document. It then goes through your countywide planning policies and shows which policies at the countywide level implement your regional policies. We've then gone through your comprehensive plan and said, okay, so which policies do you have that implement the change to Vision 2050 and to your countywide planning policies? And then we've asked ourselves, is there a gap or is there an area where you might want to consider taking some action? At least it's a suggestion, it's a placeholder, it's a marker that says, hey, we should come back to this. So for this one, for example, it says, hey, there's a partial gap, we should be looking at this as part of the update. So the two formats is that we provided you the 160-page version, but for 3/4 of your policies, there's nothing that we found that you really need to be looking at. So what we did is we extracted where we've made the comment that there could be a partial gap and provided that into a shorter 40-page document so that it's a little more user-friendly. But so we know you might not want to spend a Saturday afternoon going through 160 pages, but it does provide a really strong record that you're showing your work, and it'll provide for great conversations with the Planning Commission. The other pieces that we've done is we've done the same thing with new legislations that's passed. So we took a look at House Bill 1220 and 1117 and did an analysis as well. Here's what the new state laws changes say. Here's what your policies say. Here are gaps that we might want to take a look at and extracted those out. So a good bit of work has gone into this, but I think it will really pay off later. And I think it's really smart to get this done early. So that's where we're at. I think at this point I can stop sharing. And if the Planning Commission has any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything you have.
Questions, it seems. Thank you.
You bet.
For the good of the order. Correspondence?
None.
Staff comments?
Just to kind of tag onto this, this is going to be a recurring theme for the next 2 years, so we're going to slowly start working through this. We did apply for a missing middle housing grant, which added some requirements to us, but also helped pay for some of the stuff that would have to be done under 1220, which we'd have to do anyway. So we're waiting to hear back from that. Just kind of broadly, the comprehensive plan is looking at about a $500,000 project, and we're getting about 225 from the state between two grants. So still a big uplift, and we're going to lots to continue on that. August, as I said, August 31st, we'll hopefully have our September meeting, and go from there. So the big work items left for the Planning Commission this year are going to be the code update. We're going to have an ADU code update, and then the 2022 development regulations kind of maintenance package, which will come late this year. And I think we have one more comprehensive plan thing to do with the CIP toward the end of the year. So that's kind of where we're at. We are doing interviews for a new assistant planner in a couple weeks. So hopefully our planning staff's kind of getting put back together, and you'll start to see more of hopefully Bonney coming to these meetings. For me, that's all I have. If there's any questions, I can always answer them.
I do have one thing to say. I think we have a commissioner on July 27th celebrating a 50th anniversary. July 27th? That's not your 50th, Fran?
My 50th.
Just wanted to congratulate you on that milestone.
Good job.
Yeah, I wasn't married, I was issued.
They both work. Good job staying around for 50.
I got a text from Commissioner Huber who able to make it, so I would like a motion to excuse her. So moved. Second. All in favor, say aye.
I
He is excused.
wanted to say, Commissioner Strauss-Boyd never got to sign the timesheet, but she has been here, I think, the whole time.
Yeah, we just
Yeah, we
referenced
got
her.
it.
Thank you, Brad.
Any further?
So,
No notice?
Rumored that he's moved, but
Really?
not anything I've been able to confirm officially, and I've not seen anything officially, so we will begin to try to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah.
Because I think that he has now had 2 unexcused absences. And so I'll reach out to him and find out what's going on.
Yeah. Doesn't the minutes say he was here?
He wasn't here at the last meeting.
Well, I've got, him listed as here.
No, he was here because he turned on my monitor, because I didn't know how to use my monitor.
Was he here then?
Mhm, He was sitting next to me.
Okay, so maybe this is his first one. I'll find out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Motion to adjourn.
So
So moved. Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're excused. We're closed.